Christmas Eve, 1945. In the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, the air was crisp with the promise of snow and the warmth of holiday cheer. Inside the large two-story timber house of the Sodder family, that warmth was a palpable thing. George and Jenny Sodder, Italian immigrants who had carved out a successful American life, presided over a lively and bustling home. Tonight, 9 of their 10 children were under their roof, their laughter echoing through the halls, the excitement for the morning to come a vibrant, living energy. But as the embers in the fireplace began to die down and the children drifted off to sleep, a different kind of energy was gathering outside in the cold Appalachian darkness, an energy that would ignite a mystery that still burns, unsolved to this very day. This is the story of a fire in the night, a house reduced to ash, and a question that has haunted a family and a nation for nearly 80 years. What happened to the 5 Sodder children who were there one moment and gone the next? Were they tragic victims of a holiday blaze, or were they stolen from their beds in an act of unimaginable cruelty, their disappearance masked by the roar of the flames? The line between accident and conspiracy, between grief and paranoia, would blur until it vanished completely, leaving only the cold, hard fact: 5 children were gone. The evening had been perfectly ordinary. The older children, Marion, 17, had given Christmas gifts to her younger siblings, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, and Betty, 5. The younger ones, thrilled with their new toys, begged to stay up later than their usual bedtime. Exhausted from the day, Jenny Sodder agreed, reminding them to put the cows in and close the chicken coop before they turned in. She, George, and their 2-year-old daughter Sylvia, the youngest of the 10, went up to bed. The older sons, John, 23, and George Jr., 16, who had spent the day working with their father, were already asleep in their upstairs bedroom. The stage was set for a peaceful Christmas morning. The first crack in the night's tranquility came at around 12:30 a.m. The phone rang shrill and unwelcome. Jenny answered. On the other end was a woman she didn't know, asking for a name she didn't recognize. Jenny could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses in the background, like a party was in full swing. She told the caller she had the wrong number and hung up, a minor annoyance. As she returned to bed, she noticed something odd. The lights were still on downstairs and the front door was unlocked. She assumed it was the children, forgetful in their excitement, and thought little of it as she drifted back to sleep. Just half an hour later, at 1 a.m., she was jolted awake again, this time by a sound from above. A loud, percussive thud on the roof, followed by what sounded like something rolling down. It was a strange, unsettling noise, but in the deep quiet of the night, a house can make many sounds. Once more she fell into a fitful sleep, but the next time she awoke, there would be no mistaking the danger. The house was on fire. At 1:30 a.m., Jenny smelled smoke. She woke to find that George Sodder's office, located on the ground floor, was filled with flames. The room was at the base of the staircase, the only route to the second floor where the children slept. In an instant, the house had become a death trap. George, Jenny, Marion, Sylvia, and the 2 older boys, John and George Jr., scrambled out of the burning home into the freezing night. But Maurice, Martha, Louis, Betty, and Jenny were still trapped in their attic bedrooms. The house was now an inferno, the staircase a roaring chimney of fire. Panic set in. George Sodder, a man of action, immediately began trying to save his children. He ran to the side of the house to grab his heavy-duty ladder, intending to climb to the attic window, but the ladder, which was always kept leaning against the side of the house, was gone. It had vanished. Desperate, he decided to pull one of his 2 coal trucks up to the house and climb on top of it to reach the window. He ran to the trucks, keys in hand, but neither would start. The engines, which had worked perfectly the day before, were inexplicably dead. The cold was bitter, but it wasn't cold enough to kill 2 fully functional work trucks. Meanwhile, Marion had run to a neighbor's house to call the Fayetteville Fire Department, but the line was dead. Another neighbor, seeing the blaze from the main road, tried to call from a nearby tavern, but got no response from the operator. The town's fire alert system, a siren that could be activated by any of the town's handful of telephone operators, remained silent. By the time the fire department finally arrived at dawn, hours after the blaze had begun, The Sodder family home was nothing but a smoldering pile of ash and a smoking basement. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, offered the grieving parents a bleak and simple explanation. The 5 missing children had been inside, and the fire had been so intense that it had cremated their bodies completely. For George and Jenny Sodder, this explanation was not only unbearable, it was impossible. George had driven trucks of dirt to fill the basement during the home's construction and knew exactly how much debris should be there. He began to question the official story. How could a fire, even an intense one, completely obliterate the bones of 5 children and leave nothing behind? He had heard of animal bones surviving house fires. Surely human bones would too. Jenny, in her grief, began conducting her own experiments, burning small animal bones in a stove to see if they would turn to ash. They never did. The seeds of a lifelong, obsessive search for the truth had been planted. The family's doubt solidified into terrifying certainty as more strange details emerged. A telephone repairman confirmed that the Sodder's phone line hadn't been burned through. It had been cleanly cut, high up on the pole. Then, a few days after the fire, George and his sons found the missing ladder. It hadn't been stolen, it had been thrown down a steep embankment over 75 feet from the house, a place it could never have landed by accident. The official cause of the fire was listed as faulty wiring, but George had just had the house professionally rewired and inspected, and the power company had declared it perfectly safe. The coincidences were piling up into a mountain of suspicion. This suspicion turned to outright fear when they began to recall events from the months leading up to the fire. George Sodder was a proud and vocal anti-Mussolini Italian, a fact that had caused friction within the heavily Italian-American local community. He had gotten into several heated arguments about his political views. More chillingly, a visiting insurance salesman had tried aggressively to sell him a life insurance policy. When George refused, the man became angry and warned him that his house would go up in smoke, and his children would be destroyed because of the dirty remarks he'd been making about Mussolini. Another man had come to the property looking for work and pointed to the 2 fuse boxes at the rear of the house. He told George that this is going to cause a fire someday. At the time, George thought it was a strange comment, but now it felt like a direct threat. And what about the thud on the roof Jenny had heard? Weeks after the fire, their youngest daughter Sylvia was playing in the yard and found a small, hard, dark green rubber object. George recognized it as the casing for a pineapple-style hand grenade or some other type of incendiary device. The official explanation was now not just flimsy, it was a lie. George and Jenny became convinced their children had not died in the fire. The fire was a diversion. Their children had been kidnapped. With this conviction, the Sodders dedicated their lives to finding their lost children. They hired a private investigator, a man named C.C. Tinsley. Tinsley made a shocking discovery. The insurance salesman who had threatened George was a member of the coroner's jury that had ruled the fire an accident. He also heard a rumor that the fire chief, F.J. Morris, was the one who had found the rubber bomb in the yard and had hidden it, telling no one. The investigation seemed to be gaining traction, but then just as he was closing in on something, Tinsley vanished without a trace, abandoning the case, and was never heard from by the Sodders again. Undeterred in 1952, George and Jenny erected a large billboard on Route 16 overlooking the site of their former home. On it were the pictures of the 5 missing children: Morris, Martha, Louis, Betty, and Jenny. It offered a $5,000 reward, later doubled to $10,000, for any information leading to their recovery. For the next 37 years, that billboard stood as a haunting monument to a family's undying hope and an area's dark secret. It became a piece of American folklore, a landmark of loss that travelers would stop and stare at, wondering at the fate of the 5 smiling faces looking out at them. The billboard generated tips, thousands of them over the decades. Each one was a flicker of hope in the darkness, and each one was ultimately extinguished. A woman who ran a tourist court in Charleston claimed to have seen the children in a car with Florida license plates the morning after the fire. A woman in St. Louis wrote a letter claiming that Martha Sodder was alive and living in a convent there. When the Sodders investigated, they were turned away. A waitress in Texas overheard a conversation between two men who seemed to be talking about a fire that happened on Christmas Eve in West Virginia. The leads came from everywhere and led nowhere. Each dead end another wound for the grieving parents. Then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, a letter arrived. It was postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, and was addressed simply to Jenny Sodder. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid to late 20s. He bore a striking resemblance to their son Louis, who would have been around that age. On the back of the photo was a cryptic, handwritten note. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Elil boys, A90132 or 35. The Sodders were electrified. The resemblance was uncanny. The same dark curly hair, the same dark eyes, the same distinctively shaped nose. They hired another private investigator and sent him to Kentucky to find the young man. But just like the investigator before him, he took their money and promptly disappeared. George Sodder died in 1969, his body worn out from a life spent searching. He never gave up hope, telling his children to never let the story die. Jenny Sodder lived for another 2 decades, wearing black for the rest of her life as a sign of mourning. She tended a memorial garden at the site of the home, a quiet, heartbreaking vigil for the children she believed were still alive. She passed away in 1989, and with her death, the billboard, weathered and faded, was finally taken down. The last surviving Sodder child, Sylvia, is now an elderly woman. She was only 2 years old on the night of the fire, but she has spent her entire life under the shadow of the mystery, still believing her siblings survived. So, what is the truth? 2 primary theories remain. The first is that it was, against all odds, a tragic accident. An overwhelmed small-town fire department simply botched the investigation. The children's remains were consumed by the unique conditions of the fire. A blaze fueled by timber and coal, and the fill dirt in the basement insulated the heat, turning it into a makeshift crematorium. The cut phone line, the missing ladder, the dead trucks, all just a string of horrible, tragic coincidences that fed a grieving family's need for answers where there were none. The second theory is far more sinister. A meticulously planned kidnapping and arson, likely carried out by organized crime as retribution for George's anti-fascist views. In this scenario, the children were taken from the house just before the fire was set. The threats, the cut phone line, the disabled trucks, and the missing ladder weren't coincidences. They were calculated steps in a cold-blooded plot. The strange sightings and the Kentucky photograph become tantalizing glimpses of children who grew into adults under new identities, perhaps never knowing the truth of their own past, or perhaps too afraid to ever come home. The fire on Christmas Eve of 1945 has long since gone out. George and Jenny Sodder are gone. The billboard is gone. But the questions remain, burning brighter than ever in the annals of American true crime. It's a story that endures not just because of its chilling, unsolved nature, but because of the fierce, unwavering love of the parents who refuse to let their children be forgotten. It is a ghost story born from fire and ice, a thriller written in ash and smoke, and a testament to a family's hope that refused to die, even when everything else had been turned to dust. What do you believe happened to the Sodder children? Was it a tragic accident compounded by incompetence, or a dark conspiracy that has held its secrets for decades? Look up the photograph sent to the family in 1967, the one believed to be Louis Sodder. The resemblance is chilling. Let us know your theories in the comments below. The story may be old, but the search for answers continues with every person who hears it. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the mysteries of the past.